about St. Francis of Assisi. I want to read something. He didn't write it, but it's about him and it catches his spirit. Just a part of it. I won't take the time to read it all. St. Francis to the birds. Little sisters, the birds, we must praise God, you and I. You with songs that fill the sky, I with halting words. Little flowers of air, with your feathers soft and sleek, and your bright brown eyes and meek, he hath made you fair. He hath taught to you skill to weave in tree and thatch, nests where happy mothers hatch speckled eggs of blue, and hath children given. When the soft heads overbrim the brown nests, then thank ye him in the clouds of heaven. Also in your lives live his laws who loveth you. Husbands, be ye kind and true, be home-keeping wives. Love not gossiping, stay at home and keep the nest. Fly not here and there in quest of the newest thing. He's talking to the birds, of course. Live as brethren live. Love be in each heart and mouth. Be not envious, be not wroth, be not slow to give. When ye build a nest, quarrel not over straw or wool. He who hath, be bountiful to the neediest. Be not puffed nor vain of your beauty or your worth, of your children or your birth, or the praise you gain. Eat not greedily. Sometimes for sweet mercy's sake, this is lovely, worm or insect spare to take. Let it crawl or fly. See ye sing not near to our church on holy day, lest the human folk should stray from their prayers to hear. Now depart in peace. In God's name I bless each one. May your days be long in the sun and your joys increase. And remember me, your poor brother Francis, who loves you and gives thanks to you for this courtesy. Sometimes when ye sing, name my name, that he may take pity for the dear song's sake on my shortcomings. There is something about life, for lack of a better characterization, that says that life is alive, that life is dynamic, and that there are purposes and ends, goals, that extend beyond the little purpose and the little goal and the little end of the little or the big man. In other words, life seems to me to be working towards fulfillments in the large, gross in the sense that they are unrefined as far as the particular mind is concerned, but in the sweep of the life process, ends are achieved that are greater than any little end. And perhaps, if a man can be sufficiently sensitive, consciously or unconsciously, to relate his little purpose to the big purpose, his little goal to the big goal, his little ends to the big end, then the strength and the power and the fullness of the big purpose and the big goal and the big end may give vitality to the little purpose and the little goal and the little end. Now that sounds a long ways to St. Francis. But it isn't really. Because St. Francis came along at a time when the lights were going out everywhere. The church had become sterile, and the medicine of salvation, of which the church at that time was the custodian, the dispenser, was given only to those who rated it in one way or another because they were able to pay or because they could pile up enough deeds and so forth and so on. And the little man with his little hopes was desolate. And God moved in the heart of a little valley and stirred a man who became the answer to the darkness. And life is always doing that, isn't it? Always doing that. Because life is its own restraint, because life is alive and dynamic. Any study of history reveals many illustrations of the thing. Let's to take one to which I've referred many times from this pulpit. In the early 19th century, 1805, 6, when Napoleon was at the height of his power, strutting across Europe like some mighty colossus, dominating the whole horizon so that all men who looked in any direction could not see the light because of his shadow. What happened? In England, at least 2 babies were born. Right at the peak of Napoleonic power. One was Charles Darwin. And you can see what the work of Darwin's mind did to all the presuppositions that a Napoleon had. There was another, of course, Mendelssohn, but I'm not intelligent enough to know too much about how that bears. But the other, a baby was born in a log cabin in Kentucky, and his name was Abraham Lincoln. Precisely at the moment of what seemed to have been the greatest bankruptcy. It's interesting. So, we are not surprised that St. Francis comes along at a time when the lights are out. Life is like that, I think. Francis came from a very wealthy family. You know his story well. I'll just give it in bold outline and then come at once to where he belongs in this procession. He lived gaily, a man of great joy, troubadour, first by the grace of self and then later by the grace of God, troubadour nevertheless. And then one day, he stopped for prayer in a wayside chapel. A chapel that had fallen into disrepair, if I may say it that way. And the moment of turning into the chapel, was the climax of a long inner process that had been at work in this man's sensitive spirit. A process that was bringing him closer and closer and closer to the kind of decision that would transform his life. He knelt and he prayed. And when he opened his eyes, the crucifix that needed restoration opened its eyes and said to him, "Repair my church." Now, we need not waste any time on whether or not the crucifix spoke. What Francis saw, because all the words that we use about it will be descriptive words. They will not have to do with the thing itself. It is sufficient to say that Francis, when he heard the voice, surrendered his life. And when he surrendered his life, so much energy that had been dammed up in him by his inner conflict was released, that he became a new man. And we may explain it in any way we wish. The fact is, he came into this place in one condition, and he went out in a new and radically different condition. It's like the figure that Carl Sandburg describes about the violinist, the man who went up on the attic in the gallery to hear Michelmo play the violin, and he spent his last 25 cents. He was about to commit suicide. His all life had caved in on him. But he said, "Well, I'll spend this last quarter and go up and get a seat in the gallery," says Carl Sandburg about this man, "and hear Michelmo play the violin once before I die." And when Michelmo began playing the violin, the dam broke in the man who heard. And Carl Sandburg, in his quaint and wonderful manner, says, "And when he came downstairs out of the gallery, his feet hit the sidewalk in a new way." Now that's the thing. Now what happened, we won't try to talk about the more. But that it happened is crucial and important. So Francis renounced a lot of things, because he was a disappointment to his father, because his father had ambitions for him, and when he came in with this idea about surrendering his life, then that didn't make very much sense. So there was some legal matter that was referred to the bishop having to do with property rights and so forth and so on. And Francis just, when the hearing was called, Francis just bundled all of the clothes that he had, that he owned, put them under his arm, and walked into the hearing without a stitch on. And said, "Well, here it is. That's the end of your claim on me." very dramatic and may not be true. But the important thing is that they said he did it. And that indicates the measure of the impact of the man's mind on his contemporaries. That's the important thing. And then he began making certain discoveries, and I want to talk about these because it is in this area that his mysticism looms large. He's an uncomplicated mystic. He isn't bothered about trying to understand the Godhead and the soul and how the Godhead manifests itself, as we will be seeing when we talk about Eckhart. He isn't interested in any of the metaphysical problems, any of the theological problems, or the philosophical problems. The only thing he knows is that there is in his heart a song, which song is an expression of the love of God as the love of God manifests itself in Francis, and it is this same music that he hears when he listens to another person's heart. It is the same music that he hears when he looks at the birds or the sun or the flowers. The love of God singing in his heart, and the love of God that is in every other living thing answers the music. That's all Francis says. He gathered around him some followers, and when this creative thing which was in him began moving, it had to be organized. You know, organization is very important. It is the way by which great creative concepts are kept from disintegrating, and also it is the way by which they are embalmed. But and in order to have the right for this order, the Pope gave him permission, but the ultimate authority, of course, rested with the Pope and so forth. And Francis had no interest in all of that, really. All he wanted to do was love people and be loved by them and respond to them naturally and simply, without ambiguities and thickness. And near the end of his life, he had the great experience. It was Easter, and he'd been praying and meditating on the life of Jesus Christ. On the suffering, and he sought God to please permit him to experience in his body the suffering of Jesus Christ, and in his heart the love of Jesus Christ. Interesting combination. And as the sun rose on Easter morning, and a great tidal wave of unrelenting emotion swept up through him and engulfed him and identified all of his being with what he felt was the resurrected Christ standing in the shafts of light from the morning sun. And that happened to him. He looked at his hands, in his hands, and in his feet, and in his side, there was the stigmata. There was the blood. There are about 42, last time I checked this was 10 years ago. At that time there were about 42 cases on record of the stigmata of men or women who experienced at a moment of great critical identification in their bodies the wounds of Jesus. One other thing about him, and then I will pick up the thing that I want to pinpoint. He battled with disease all of his life. About 20 years ago, a little book was written called Fighters of Fate. It's a story of a group of men who had wrestled with tuberculosis and who had won the battle. And one of the most inspiring chapters in that little book is a chapter on St. Francis's struggle with tuberculosis and his triumph over it. Now, he died. Feeling that as far as the great order that bears his name is concerned, it would have been much better if he'd never been involved in it. But he also died feeling that in his life, the love of God had been so operative that all who knew him responded to him in kind. Now, in a general way, that's the story of Francis. There are two things about it to which I want to call your attention now. One is what he does about poverty, how in his renunciation, you see. Bear in mind now what the basic proposition is, that there is actively at work in him the very vital awareness of the love of God, which love is harmonious, is integrating, is whole, and the degree to which the individual in all of the dimensions of his life and personality becomes completely involved in the love of God. To that degree will he relax his interest in preferences as he lives. Now, that's very interesting. Now, think about it. Very hard for a minute. I know it's warm in here and a little on the sleepy side, but think hard for just a minute. It is the bias of the personality for preferences that creates the so many of the complicated problems of living. For instance, when Francis relaxed his insistence upon preferences, one of the first things that manifested itself was his dealing with lepers. All of his life he had had an instinctive revulsion against lepers. He would do anything to help anybody, but he simply could not abide having primary, face-to-face contact relations with lepers. But when he relaxed his insistence upon preferences, things that I enjoy to do, things I do not enjoy to do, things I like, things I do not like, when he relaxed that, then he bathed the leper, took care of them, lived there for a while, without feeling that he was doing something merely for the good of the leper, not feeling that he was doing something for the good of his own soul. But all questions of appraisal with reference to the thing that is done are relaxed because, says Francis, in the love of God there can be no disharmony. So, if I move into the living situation from within the spirit and the mood of the harmony which is the love of God, then I take into the disharmony that which works like a catalytic agent, bringing peace out of chaos and tranquility out of confusion. Tremendous thing. I just look at him and long with all my heart that someday I shall be able to do that. Now the other thing. What he does, he takes the same principle and applies it to poverty, which is another dimension of renunciation. And his quarrel with poverty isn't, his acceptance of poverty isn't because he wants to make sacrifices. And it doesn't have to do primarily or exclusively with money, with clothes, but anything that creates in the mind attitudes of disharmony, of scatteredness, of divisiveness, of divided allegiances, divided loyalties. Has to be renounced. Even the doing of good deeds, if necessary. If I find that I am wedded to the doing of good deeds, then the center of focus becomes that. And the good deed is no longer vehicular either of the loving Spirit or the will of God. Even the church might become, and for Francis to feel this in the 13th century is something. The church might become that which is an end in itself. And if it becomes an end in itself and is no longer vehicular, then it has to be renounced. renounce this is not thine. And so he embraced poverty as an attitude towards life, which made it possible in his spirit not to become attached to things, because when the interesting thing about things is that when you get them, they take over. They don't. I think I'm sure I've told you about this. When I was senior in divinity school at Mittler, a friend of mine gave me a very beautiful, thin gold Elgin watch, and up to that time I'd only had an Ingersoll watch, that made a loud noise, and I would put it on a pulpit when I was talking, and with a lot of silence in between, you could hear the thing tick away, and this friend decided that he would do something about it, so he gave me this beautiful watch. Well, I had, for 6 months, I'd been conducting a study group 2.5 miles across town. This was in Rochester, New York, and we would begin at 10 o'clock at night and go until 12:30, and then I would walk home down Main Street, 1 o'clock, 1:30. But after I was given this watch, then I changed my route completely. I walked only where there were bright street lamps, because I did not want anybody to take my watch. I didn't mind what they would do to me, you see. So that I became involved in my identification with this thing. Things are tyrannical. They squeeze. And there is no way by which we can disentangle ourselves unless we relax our attachment, not so much to the things, but to what the things symbolize in our minds. That's the thing. And it is my identification with status, my identification with security, my identification with this, or the other, that makes me take the symbol and hug it to my breast until it chokes me to death. Now, Francis saw that. And he said, don't do it. If you do, disciples or his followers, his troubadours, reminded them of a very interesting thing, that a rich man is also a child of God. Interesting. That the obligation to seek the response, the movement of the love of God in my heart, reaching to make music with the movement of the love of God in X's heart, must not be obstructed by the category into which I place the other man. So he's a communist. So I can't hear the music of the love of God. He's a Democrat. He's a Republican. He's Catholic. He's Buddhist. He's a Korean. He's a Baptist. He is rich. He's poor. He's ugly, he's beautiful. He doesn't wear decent clothes, he's overdressed. He has bad mannerisms. He's crude. All of these things, my friends, when they become the way by which we imprison another, then the music of the love of God in the heart can't make music with them. And he who builds obstructions that become divisive, walling off one man from another because of politics, creed, predicament, status, or class, is against God, whose will is that the love in my heart will make music with the love in your heart. And I'm grateful to Francis and to God, both for the inspiration and the judgment that his life places over my own.